Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, family, friends,
Lovers, ex-lovers, militia members,
future
priests,
lovers,
nuns,
shamans, tarot readers,
tarot readers, that's a good one. Crystal ball viewers,
people in the ICU,
practicers of the mystic arts, award-winning sex gods.
Obama.
This was Obama's favorite podcast in 2022. I'm Joel Guy.
And we co-host a podcast talking about sex, dating, relationships.
But mostly one goddamn book.
And why you shouldn't be a right-wing conservative pusher of incel culture.
Yeah, that's a good description. Mm-hmm. We are going to return to the second part of Chapter 4 of a multi-part episode on the book Why Women Deserve Less, a book that's remarkably wrong in every single way about history, society, the economy, relationship culture, etc., etc. But first, we have a drink.
This is Moshi brand Sparkling Yuzu White Peach.
It's a soda.
Yes.
We're not eating a peach, which would be some great audio.
It just tastes like an emergency.
It's more nuanced than emergency, but yeah, it's like has that kind of like a little bit of heat, like ginger or something at the back. Yeah. I get a bare hint of peach. Yeah. I'm not a fan of this. This might be fine in a cocktail or something, but it's not something I'm going to buy again.
Yeah.
I will sip on it. I'll do the honors.
Joel, I think that we should give a recommendation to our audience for a good bar or something to go to. Because I saw via your girlfriend, your partner, your lover, that she posted those pictures of you guys going to that bar downtown.
Oh, those pictures, yeah. For Phoenix area listeners, Lauren and I have gone twice now.
Yeah.
We went 3 times, but returned away once.
It was very sad.
To Quartz, which is a fancy new bar in kind of central Phoenix area. It is incredible. They have a bunch of drinks at the main area that are all themed after birthstones, and they have some incredible non-alcoholic cocktails, including a cucumber one that is perhaps my favorite thing I've consumed in the last 5 years.
Ooh.
It's really good. But Quartz has a secret bar behind the main bar, which you have to get reservations for. It is called The Cave. And The Cave has all of the birthstone-themed cocktails, but then a bunch of cocktails themed after deserts. Polar deserts, Australian deserts, Saharan deserts, Moroccan deserts. They have some really creative, really intriguing drinks. I was blown away by everything I consumed. I didn't like everything, but the things that I ordered that I knew I would like, I definitely enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good example of what cocktails can be. Often I buy overpriced cocktails and they don't taste like anything. They have 15 ingredients and it tastes like sugar and maybe a vodka. And these are nuanced, exciting, refreshing libations. I would strongly recommend. That said, they're horrifically expensive.
Yeah.
So make it like a big date night anniversary thing.
Go out with friends. Have a good night. Remember to have a DD.
Sure. And you know who's not going to have a good night?
Who?
Us, because we're reading this book.
Yep.
We are returning once more to Why Women Deserve Less, a book that's all about why women suck. There used to be an old contract, according to the writer, where men resources give, women give sex, but then feminism and women's liberation and capitalism.
And birth control.
Yeah. In the second part of Chapter 4, we're going to explore his claim that relationships between the sexes have never been worse under the new contract. And unfortunately, this is the chapter where he starts using citations again.
God damn it.
And I had to dig into every single one of his citations. Now, we've talked already about the horrible editing of this book.
Yeah.
Naomi, when you give a citation, how should you format it?
Usually when I was taught how to write 5-paragraph essays, it's you give a citation and then you have 3 times as much reference to the citation as the citation. So if the citation is one,
I meant in the source list when you're recording.
You usually source it, and you're depending on the format, like MLA, APA, date it was published, shit like that. Yeah,
co-authors, link to it. He just throws a bunch of HTML links into things.
Love it.
Keep in mind he does cite books, but the books are all like right-wing manosphere things.
You're
so
saying HTML links, like he wants you to like click on it, even though it's like a physical book.
yeah.
My job does that.
I'm not joking. He literally cites this stuff,
Yeah.
gives you a link to the end of the book, which has the actual HTML link.
Yeah.
And it's very dumb, and unfortunately I dug into all of them. So here we go.
Woohoo!
By nearly every measure, the sexes have abandoned one another instead of blissfully coming together. Ruch's 2018 assessment of modern dating culture. Women suck and think only of themselves. From Chapter 1 is real and backed by statistical facts. Here are some numbers, since you guys know I love stats. I mentioned this in either part 1 or part 2, but this is why it's kind of scary, because he's not just like some right-wing misogynist. He's a right-wing misogynist who claims he has data backing him up.
Yeah, and then doesn't.
Well, he does, and if you don't dig into any of it, you might be like, oh, okay, I can sort of see the logic. So I think, unfortunately, it's more compelling than a lot of people want to give him credit for, because there's men who've like never thought about these issues before, suddenly being confronted by someone who claims he has all the answers with data.
Yep.
Except when you dig into the data, you're like, ugh, that doesn't say anything. Yeah, so he dumps everything at the end of the book in the form of links. Keep in mind that as I read these, he's trying to argue that the adoption of the new contract in the last 20 to 30 years has ruined relationships and messed up a perfectly good system. Ask yourself, while you're listening to these, how much of this was due to changes in relationship culture, and how much is just due to people now being poorer than their parents were at the same age?
Okay.
Number 1, marriage is at an all-time low of 5.1 marriages per 1,000 people, half the long-term average going back to 1900. I can't find a citation for this.
Okay.
So he says he's going to like give stats and links. Can't find it. Might be in Rollo's book, which is his first citation.
Got it.
This is correct for 2019. But in 2021, it bounced back to 6 marriages per 1,000.
Okay.
So he didn't bother checking the most recent data prior to publishing. He is correct that there is a long-term trend of less marriages than before, at least in the United States, because why bother to see if the rest of the world has similar issues? I mean, I'm only really rebutting it with U.S. data, so I'm not going to give him too much crap over that. So the CDC in 2022 said that the marriage rate was 5.1 in 2019 compared to 8.2 in 2000. That's a 38% drop in marriages in 20 years. That's a big deal. But if we scroll down a single page to the divorce rate, we see that divorces have fallen as well, from 4 per 1,000 in the year 2000, 4 per 1,000 to 2.5 per 1,000 in 2019.
Interesting.
That's also a 38% drop. Less people are getting married and less people are getting divorced. It's hard to tell if these are the same people, but one could argue that less people are getting divorced because the marriages that have occurred in the last few years are, as he says, stronger than they were before. But also, we're comparing divorces per 1,000 people over time. Divorces have to come after marriages, and the number of divorces each year remains much lower than the number of marriages throughout the historical data, so the implication is less marriages from the past are ending in divorce. Now, there is a way out of this for him, and that's the idea that there are certain people getting married and divorced far more than other people, and they skew the rate for everyone else. But that kind of undermines his next assertion. Assertion 2 is that those who do marry face the same 45% divorce rate that American marriages have suffered in the past. He cites divorce statistics from pt4family.com.
Okay.
My first point is, if this is the same as it was in the past, how did the new contract cause this? The new contract ruined relationships, but if relationships have always been like this, the new contract didn't do shit.
Yeah.
In fact, the new contract just perpetuated the status quo. I don't think women with purple hair or the 10 million genders he cites caused this one. Second, the stat he's using is from a family law firm based in Arizona, Naomi. Woohoo! And I think it's fair to say they might have an incentive in encouraging people that divorce is super common, right? If people are feeling like on the fence about divorce, maybe have a page on your website that's like, actually divorcing is okay and totally normal. You should hire us to do your divorce. If you think it's normal, you're probably more comfortable getting a divorce, even if, your family, culture, customs discourage you typically from doing that. Not a great source. In fact, experts say the divorce rate has never been around 50%. It's a misunderstanding of how divorce and marriage rates are calculated. So this is from 2005, but does actually provide some context that's relevant here. So New York Times in 2005, April 2005, had an article written by Dan Hurley about the divorce rate. And they say this: the figure of the divorce rate is based on a flawed calculation. The annual marriage rate per 1,000 people compared to the annual divorce rate. In 2003, for instance, the most recent year for which data was available at the time, there were 7.5 marriages per 1,000 people and 3.8 divorces. But researchers say this is misleading because the people who are divorcing in any given year are not the same as those who are marrying, and that statistic is virtually useless in understanding divorce rates. In fact, they say that studies find the divorce rate in the United States has never reached 1 in every 2 marriages, and new research suggests that, with rates now declining, it probably will. The method preferred by social scientists in determining the divorce rate is to calculate how many people who have ever married subsequently divorced. Counted that way, the rate has never exceeded about 41%. Although sharply rising rates in the 1970s led some to project the number to keep increasing, the rate has instead begun to inch downward. Rose Kreider, a demographer at the Fertility and Family Statistics branch of the Census Bureau, said that at this point, unless there's some kind of turnaround, I wouldn't expect any cohort to ever reach 50% since none already have. 2 years ago, based off a 1996 survey, Rose Kreider predicted that if the trends then in place held steady, the divorce rate might eventually reach 50%. But then they released a revised report. And in the revised report, for people born over in 1955 or later, the proportion ever divorced had actually declined. Compared with women married before 1975, those married since 1975 had slightly better odds of reaching their 10th and 15th wedding anniversaries with their marriages still intact. The highest rate of divorce in the 2001 survey was 41% for men who were then between the ages of 50 and 59, and 39% for women in the same age group. The people under the old contract, Naomi. The highest rates of divorce in the United States, when we're studying this with an actual sociological background, are among the people who are the oldest. 19, 20, 30, 40 birth years, right? Mm-hmm. He's saying the new contract with younger people has turned everything over. But actually, people are getting divorced less. Because it turns out, when you get married and it isn't by coercion, you might be happier with your partner.
Crazy.
But since 1980, the two groups have taken diverging paths. Women without undergraduate degrees have remained at about the same rate of divorce, their risk of divorce or separation within the first 10 years of marriage hovering around 35%. For college graduates, the divorce rate in the first 10 years of marriage has plummeted to just 16% of those married between 1990 and 1994, from 27% of those married between 1975 and 1979. Naomi, the youngest people and the most highly educated people are the least likely to divorce.
Okay.
It is women who come from an older generation who do not have the same level of educational attainment who are most likely to divorce. He's wrong. Full stop. He's an idiot. 60% of all marriages that eventually end in divorce do so within the first 10 years, researchers say. If that continues to hold true, the divorce rates for college graduates married between 1990 and 1994 would end up at only 25%, compared to well over 50% for those without a 4-year college degree. This guy's an idiot. If anything, you should be encouraging the new contract. The new contract means people divorce less. Okay, so he goes on. He says 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by women, jumping to 90% if the woman is college educated, which we've just proven is completely inaccurate.
Yes.
What marriages remain intact only stand a 28.5% of being happy, which is an interesting statistic.
Okay.
So this is from another law firm, which is another biased source, called the Jimenez Law Firm, Why Women Initiate Divorce, Understanding Female-Initiated Divorce. Mm-hmm. He's including this to argue that women are ruining relationship culture and jumping on welfare. Men thus have no incentive to want to date because they're so likely to get stabbed in the back unexpectedly by their partner.
Yes.
But interestingly, the law firm includes some research on why this gap is so large. So his own source gives this information.
Okay.
Women today have more on their plate than ever before. Many women are trying to balance taking care of children, domestic duties such as housework and cooking, and being a good wife, all while they work a full or part-time job.
Yes.
Despite women making up more than half the United States workforce in many relationships, they are still viewed as the individual primarily accountable for domestic responsibilities in the house. That's not to say that men don't help out. However, a 2019 U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics report indicates that on an average day in 2018, only 20% of men did any housework in comparison to 50% of women. This is a strong indication that among married couples with equal responsibility, the women still tend to pull more weight around the house. So the issue, per his own source, is women getting all the downsides of the old contract with none of the upsides, like not needing to work.
Yep.
Men are no longer taking care of women like they used to, so they're dodging their contractual obligations. In addition to handling more of the domestic responsibilities, many women say their husbands are not supportive of their careers, particularly when they're highly successful. Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin published a study in 2019 that took a look at over 6,000 heterosexual American couples over a period of 15 years. God, what a depressing study.
Yeah.
The study indicated that many husbands experienced the effects of psychological distress when their wives made more than 40% of the household income. So not only are men not supportive of women being breadwinners, they have literal traumatic responses when their wife is the man of the house. You'd think you could have the old contract work with gender roles reversed. Man being the stay-at-home husband, providing good sex, and women working, but I guess that's not what the 200,000 years of evolutionary history have led us to. Aw, shucks. When women excel at their careers, are expected to perform more of the domestic duties, and don't get support from their husbands, well, it's no wonder women initiate divorce more often. They may, quite simply, determine that being married is no longer in their best interest. He has a second link which says almost the exact same thing from a law firm called Irwin & Irwin, Why Do Women Initiate Divorce More Than Men? He also doesn't even explain where he got the happy marriage stat from. Maybe it's in the ROI on Women Book of Numbers, but I'm not reading that shit. Someone else can find that for me. So I really don't know where he's getting his information on happiness. However, I did find my own information on happiness, Naomi.
Okay.
So IF Studies, Institute for Family Studies.
Okay.
Did some research, did a piece examining the question of whether or not marriages made people happy, and said, per the General Social Survey and Annual Assessment of Sociological Trends in the United States, married people were happier than unmarried people.
Okay.
That's interesting, because he just said only 28.5% of marriages that remain are happy.
Yeah.
Married people are happier than unmarried people across nearly 5 decades of surveys. Data from the GISS shows that 36% people who have ever been married, including divorced, separated, and widowed people, say they are very happy, while just 11% are not too happy, compared to 22% and 15% for people who have never married. The truth is, married people really are happier. But then they say it's really hard to tell for certain that marriage makes you happy because there's no giant data set in the United States that tracks happiness levels. It's really hard to come up with a population-level conclusion about happiness when you don't have control groups and can't correct for specific things like income level or access to healthcare or quality of friend circles or anything else that might contribute to well-being. So the study, completely concedes that. So maybe married people are happier, but it's not just because of marriage, the study says. Indeed, maybe happy people are just more likely to get married. There is some strong empirical evidence for this view. One very influential paper showed that in the several decades of German longitudinal data, self-reported happiness began to rise just before getting married, peaked in the year of marriage, then declined within a year of marriage, with larger effects for women than men. Other papers have built on this. One paper compared cohabiting and married people and found that higher happiness in marriage was due to other contextual factors, not marriage itself. These findings and others like them have led many people to discount the happiness benefits of marriage as just a product of bias and selection. Happy people get married. Marriage itself doesn't make people happy. This research, however, turns out to be even more pessimistic than it sounds. The same methods that suggest marriage doesn't impact happiness also tend to suggest that many other life experiences like unemployment and widowhood also don't impact happiness much. In other words, this research implies that the reason poor, unemployed, lonely, or disabled people are less happy isn't that bad things happen to them, that they'd just be unhappy no matter what. So that's kind of messed up. But the main takeaway here is that married people seem to be happier than non-married people. However, there could be other factors at play. So he's saying the majority of marriages are unhappy. I find data that says maybe that's not the case. But regardless, it's really difficult to determine whether or not married people are more happy. So if people are afraid of marriage because they think that they're all unhappy or will end up miserable, they're just misinformed because those fears aren't really based in anything real. Now, he goes on to say cohabitation is no better, with half of them ending just as marriages do. And I'm like, but you were like, marriages are requirements and cohabitations don't work. But if half of cohabitations end like marriages do, they're just as successful as marriage, whatever. Let's dig into that. I don't understand what he means by half of them ending just as marriages do, because he's saying marriages end in divorce, but if you're cohabitating, you can't get divorced from someone. Does he just mean separated from that person?
Sure, let's go with that.
Yeah,
because if you dig into it, cohabitation can lead to marriages that are not marriages in the state. What do you call those? Those when you live
civil unions.
Yeah, civil unions, and then that would mean that they actually do have to get divorced by the state.
Yeah, so it would seem to be better to cohabitate per his own logic, because you can restore the contract a lot easier if people are cohabitating, right? Because then you don't even have to go through all the loops of marriage and you get just as successful of results as marriage. To be clear, he's including this to prove his point that all relationships, not just marriages, are floundering. But then he's disproving his assertion that the old contract is best for society by showing that non-traditional relationship arrangements actually survive just as long or longer. So that's cool. He goes on. Family formation is down from 3.6 births per woman in 1960 to 1.64 births per woman in 2020. And that includes immigrant families who traditionally have more children than the native population. So I don't know why he included this. Because if women's primary role under the old contract was to provide sex and children, why does the number of children matter?
That's a good question. Because as long as they're giving children, it doesn't matter. Children are already kind. Even if they're just giving sex.
So is his implication that there's a set number of children you have to be happy?
2.5.
2.5.
Yeah.
The only reason you throw this in is to feed right-wing concerns about other countries' populations growing too big and Western culture being wiped out.
Yep.
Or you believe that the number of children one has is directly related to happiness, which is objectively wrong.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a high-quality study for this, but I found some information from onlineforbaby.com, which is a very large parenting blog online that interviewed or surveyed the people who utilize their services. You know, it's a basic forum where it's like, oh, my baby keeps pooping. What are the best diapers to contain poop? Or, you know, things like that. So they did this survey in September 2021 and interviewed several thousand of their members, including people from Gen Z and Gen X. And of those people, 2 children is considered the optimal number for happiness. 1.64, which is the current average, is closer to 2 than 3.6 is.
Yeah.
So modern couples seem pretty close to what would make them happiness, per his own logic. The number of children going down actually means these modern people are probably going to be happier. Number 6, he says that premarital activities such as courtship, dating, and sex are down as well. Your average millennial gets only 1.43 dates per year compared to 9.3 and 4.7 for Xers and boomers. Now, I think we can agree with the general sentiment. We've discussed on our podcast that people are dating less,
yes.
right? And we've dug into, people have no money, which is more of a capitalism thing than anything else.
Yeah.
But let's talk about his source. His source is an Amazon link to the book, How Not to Become a Millennial. I'm not sure if he's like, one of the reviews in this link is what gave me this information, or if he actually read the book. But this is from the book How Not to Be a Millennial, which I haven't read. I think it's first worth noting, based upon what we've discussed in prior episodes, that how we date has changed considerably over time.
Yeah.
Boomers, for instance, were far more likely to date in chaperone settings than Gen X or millennials. And they might count something like a chaperone school dance as a date. I think a lot of people in middle school right now wouldn't consider a chaperone school dance a date, but that's probably what they're counting there. The odds of something like that ending with sex seem pretty low compared to modern dates, where there's a non-zero chance the evening can end in bed, right? Not saying it's a particularly high chance, but compared to chaperone settings where your parents are watching you in the past to no one's watching you go hog wild, seems a bit higher. Modern dating should seem pretty good to him. But also it's unclear if he's saying that boomers right now get 9.3 dates in the present or got that when they were younger at the same age as millennials. So this citation's super confusing. And this is why you actually explain your sources or provide the data in your book, not just the link.
Yeah.
Whatever. I looked around for anything that could prove this, and I can't find any information. Maybe this book did the calculations, and it's the only source of this. But when I dug up it, I found a Daily Mail article from 2015, which said the average Australian went on 41 dates per year, and that's kind of it. It's really stupid to come up with an average, because you know intuitively that some people aren't interested in dating, that some people have a vested interest in lying about how many dates they get, and some people get a disproportionate number of dates. The more interesting number for me would be median, right? Middlemost. Not average, where a lot of people get 0, a lot of people get a lot. Average doesn't mean anything. Median is the more important number. Also, keep in mind, Naomi, 44% of millennials are married. So they're probably not trying to actively date.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's included in his calculation because he didn't bother to explain his calculation. I consider date nights with your partner pretty different than dates to try and find a partner, but that's kind of just me nitpicking. He also throws in a link to a website called BriannaMacWilliam.com, which has an article titled 66 Key Millennial and Gen Z Dating Stats in 2022. It's beautiful because it's a blog post that just has a bunch of information dumped in a list, which is identical to what he's done. It's interesting because this source has some things that completely disrupt his narrative. He claims that people are miserable because they're getting less dates, but that source says millennials value freedom and independence, so 72% make a conscious decision to be single for a period of time, and 81% say that being single benefits them beyond their romantic lives, as they're able to make new friends, have more time for personal wellness, and be more dedicated to their work. Mm-hmm. His own sources are contradicting the narrative that he's pushing.
This does not surprise me at all, Joel.
But there were a lot of words on that page. Maybe you didn't read all of that. Number 7, he says, this says nothing of the younger Gen Z siblings of millennials. Oh my God, it's you. Who prefer virtual dates to the real ones.
That's not true.
I don't know why it's bad if it is true. I don't know if it's true. He didn't really explain it, but there's still dates. If there's a connection, it leads to physical dates. We discussed, like, the beginning of the year episode about how a lot of people are doing video dates to filter out people. It seems good for people under the new and the old contract. Men could be gross and assess that, like, if women had good birthing hips just by a video date, women could assess if men had lots of money to throw at them. It seems like video dating would actually be beneficial because then men aren't wasting their time going out on dates with people. Number 8, women flake on dates at least 56% of the time, but field reports from men in the red pill community put it closer to 70%. Yeah, that's who I trust.
I don't think that's true.
His link for the Brianna Mac website says 56% of men and women have been ghosted. So if that is true, it's identical to men as well. It's not something unique to women.
Yeah.
Though I guess if the red pill community says it must be true.
Yeah.
Wow. 70% of the time. I don't think that's true.
It's not
From
true.
my own experiences, maybe 1 in 4, because I've been on 4 dates.
You've been on 4 dates.
Number 9, data from Tinder Insights shows only 8.6% of people messaging each other on dating apps results in actual dates, resulting in an effectively 91.4% digital online dating flake rate. That's interesting because he opens the book by saying 1,000 men proposition women every month, and she's interested in 1% of them. But the data he's presenting here, which he doesn't cite, says she's interested in 10% of people. Pick a lane, bud. The other thing is, I don't know what it means by flake rate.
I think it's like ghosting rate.
Yeah, but most men open their conversations on dating apps with "hey," right? That's not.
God, you're really coming after, like, jabbing, like,
sure, but like if a woman doesn't respond to that, I wouldn't call that flaking.
No,
but that would fit into his narrative.
But ghosting would be we've had a conversation and then I ghost. Ghosting would not be there has been no conversation and I didn't. It's like going up to someone and saying hey and them not like hearing you and them just walking away. Like that is not like that's not flaking.
But this is the high quality evidence he considers. But Naomi, this has real repercussions because the lack of dating and socializing has led to a decline in people having sex. The percentage of young women who haven't had sex in the past year has increased by 50%.
Not true.
Well, because they've read this book and I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
Going from 12% of the population to 18%, while the percentage of men not having sex in the past has almost doubled, going from 15% to 28%. Male virginity has nearly tripled, going from 11% of the young male population to 27%.
And the incel culture begins.
Dun, dun, dun. Now I'm confused. Because I thought, according to his old contract, men were supposed to be incentivized to earn lots of money in order to win women's favor. Mm-hmm. Under the old contract, he said women would be attracted to men with lots of money naturally. Mm-hmm. If women aren't attracted to or having sex with these men, maybe they just dropped the ball. Maybe they should have gotten into more crypto schemes. Maybe they should have gone on Andrew Tate. No, please don't go on Andrew Tate's super secret male Discord.
Ew.
Okay, so this stat comes from him citing the Washington Post in a 2019 article titled Americans Are Not Having Sex According to a National Survey. Again, he cites something and then doesn't actually read the source. A not significant portion of the sex gap was caused not because people suck, but because of old people. It's not because young people are bad at sex, it's because of old people still existing.
Yeah.
The article says experts who study Americans' bedroom habits say there are a number of factors driving the Great American Sex Drought. Age is one of them. The 60 and older demographic climbed from 18% of the population in 1996 to 26% in 2018, according to the survey. The share reporting no sex has consistently hovered around 50%, and because that age group is growing relative to everyone else, is the net effect of reducing the overall population's likelihood of having sex. So because old people are still alive, because for whatever reason we take care of them in this society, because the welfare state exists, that's driving down the overall like sex rate for everyone. Now, some of this is certainly also due to young people not having as much sex as they used to. But he doesn't explain why that is, and my research indicates something interesting. So Gene Twenge, professor of psychology at San Diego State University and author of iGen, Why Today's Super-Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, said in an interview that growing sexlessness among America's 20-somethings is primarily attributable to partnering up later in life. There are more people in their 20s who don't have a live-in partner, she said, so under those circumstances, I think less sex is going to happen. Americans in their 30s, 40s, and beyond are much more likely to be married now than those in their 20s. Those age groups are now more likely to have sex in a given year than their younger peers. The data also shows a significant gender gap. For most of the 3 decades, 20-something men and women reported similar rates of sexlessness, but that has changed in recent years. Since 2018, the share of men younger than 30 reporting no sex has nearly tripled to 28%, similar to what he says. That's a much steeper increase than the 8 percentage point increase reported among their female peers. There are several potential explanations for this. Labor force participation among young men has fallen, particularly in the aftermath of the last recession. Researchers also see a connection between labor force participation and stable relationships. The survey showed, for example, that 54% of unemployed Americans didn't have a steady romantic partner, compared to 32% among the employed. Divide among 20-somethings. Young men are also more likely to be living with their parents than young women. In 2014, for instance, 35% of men aged 18 to 34 were living in their parents' homes, compared to 29% of women in that age group. 39 versus 29. At the risk of stating the obvious, when you're living at home, it's probably harder to bring sexual partners into your bedroom.
Yep.
One final factor that may be affecting American sexual habits at all ages is technology. There are a lot more things to do at 10 o'clock now than there were 20 years ago. Streaming videos, social media, console games, everything else. So let's think about this. First, more men are living with their parents and have less income or steady jobs. That's either men's fault, or per his own argument, it was them dropping the ball that led to the old contract being torn up, or due to factors outside of their control, like capitalism destroying the U.S. economy, right?
Yeah.
The capitalism which has pushed us all towards beautiful flying cars, like invented electricity, Naomi. I think personally the latter plays a big role because wages have been stagnant for 20 years, and a lot of changes in relationship culture can be attributed to the exploitation inherent to the system he cares so much for. But he doesn't like that explanation that capitalism sucks, so it must be that men suck.
Mm-hmm.
Per his own logic, sorry. Yeah. Second, people have more sex with a permanent partner. No one is saying that the people who have never had sex are never going to have sex. They're saying that they're probably more likely to get partnered up later. Nothing in the old contract says you need to be young to have a happy and successful marriage. And he implies in chapter 3 that men should be older than their partners since they need time to gather financial resources and stuff to support them. Remember, Bill Gates and his harem. He's bringing this up to argue that women have ruined dating. This is but one example of the whole relationship culture being ruined because of their selfishness, but there's no evidence it's been destroyed, it's their own fault, or that this trend is just pushing things back more than a few years. Incredible arguments.
This is capitalism's fault. That is my...
That's what the book should be called. It's all capitalism's fault.
No, because it's talking about like, oh, these people aren't having sex. Okay, yeah, you know what leads to sex? Dates, going out, actually meeting people in person. And the fact that people can't make a living wage and can barely survive, they don't want to go and spend all of their extra grocery money, their grocery money on a couple drinks and then go home and have mediocre sex.
That's a really good point, Naomi. Yeah, so that's all those amazing stats. Note that he provided almost no historical context for any of this. He mentioned it a couple of times, but he didn't really explain if stuff was down permanently or it's down a lot compared to like historical trends. He also doesn't explain what time period it's down over. Is it a part of a new shift in the last 20 years, or is it something that's been happening since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution? It would be a really impactful argument if you could say that men had sex 50 times a year in 1900 and negative 50 times a year now, but he was too lazy to do any research and he would have to define a specific time period that the old contract covered if he did that, so he just collected some stats that seemed alarming and dumped them in the list and hoped his readers would be too stupid to realize none of them proved his point and most were inaccurate representations of reality. But wait, there's more. By every metric and measure, a mathematical and catastrophic decline in love, marriage, family formation, sex, and general positive interaction between the sexes has occurred. This still says nothing about the tense psychological, emotional, and political climate between men and women. Nearly every man today is accused of unconsciously being a sexist or a misogynist, or consciously, benefiting from the evil patriarchy that oppresses women daily. Yet most women don't even know what misogyny means. Don't believe me? Watch my podcast. Oh God, he's shilling his podcast in the air. That you bought his podcast, recommended the book, and you bought it, and now he's selling it to you. Watch my podcast. Women foolishly call me a misogynist for stating objective fact, and the subsequent entertainment of asking me to fine it after their false accusation. It is hilarious. Okay, so it's hilarious, Naomi, that women don't know how to define misogyny. It's great that one example of women being unable to define a word proves that all women are idiots. Incredible. This would be a good time to link his podcast and give the men reading a chance to watch women being stupid, but he's also too lazy to do that. I unfortunately had to look it up and found a clip where the guest says she thinks the show is misogynistic, and when they ask her to define it, she says placing men above women, which really isn't that bad of a definition for someone who isn't media trained. He then says, "You're lucky you're pretty because you're dumb as fuck," which really disproves her point that the show is demeaning to women. Great work. I feel it's also worth cutting in here and saying his perception of women is that all of them are dumb bimbos and none of them have done anything as remotely interesting or important as men, which is an impression you'd really only get like if your entire existence was spent watching OnlyFans and teen TikTok videos, right? Like, if you're actually interacting with women in the world, you know they're doing a lot of shit. You know, there's women scientists and world leaders and geologists, biologists, anthropologists, park rangers, museum guides. But no, they clearly are only out there existing looking pretty for money on the internet. I'm not even letting them off easy. Algorithms play a role, but they have no interest. These people, these manosphere people, have no interest in reading books by women, watching Jane Goodall lectures, or listening to Lizzo. Of course, most women don't even want to come on a show that demeans them and creates clips of them looking stupid that are shared online for the rest of their lives. The sample size of women who are probably willing to come on here are not representative of the general population either. Due to this evil patriarchy, he says, feminism has created laws and policies that give preferential treatment to women in nearly every aspect of society, whether that's education, hiring preferences, contracts, or government aid. Worth pointing out here that a great tactic used by fascists and other political groups, but mainly fascists, is to portray your opposition as simultaneously incredibly weak, women being stupid bimbos, but also incredibly strong. Women have taken over and manipulated every element of society. Wow, isn't it crazy that silly bimbos can manipulate every aspect of society? Men must really suck. You want to portray your enemies as evil and responsible for all that is wrong with the world, but also something that can be easily defeated if everyone banded together and did the right thing. He's saying the exact same thing here, saying the obviously contradictory thing that women are incredibly stupid, but somehow able to overturn men's control of society and pervert everything to their own dark desires. Their own dark desires being making sure that children are able to eat at school. This doesn't make a lot of sense unless men are also incredibly stupid and allowed this to happen, but I don't think he's thought that through. Feminism, according to him, originally meant equality between men and women, but what has occurred is discrimination against men, which violates the definition of feminism that he just came up with. Checkmate, liberals.
Lawyered.
I don't know what you think about that, but I'm reminded of that phrase, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality seems like oppression.
Yeah.
Like, correcting historical inequities takes time and might require putting a weight on the scale to give certain groups, like racial minorities, a little assistance for centuries of oppression that prevents them from accumulating household wealth or positions of power. I don't think anyone reading this believes that, but it's worth bringing up nonetheless. The result of all this, Naomi, is hate, as men and women have been pitted against each other. Also resulting from the premise that women live in an oppressed society, women are constantly whining and complaining about non-existent sins men have committed that never seem to relent. Examples of complaints are the mythical wage gap. You know how he ended his book with the end, just big block letters?
Yeah.
He thinks he's living in like a fantasy novel. It's like gingerbread. The story of Hansel and Gretel is proof that women are selfish. The mythical wage gap, microaggressions, harassment, oppression, the patriarchy, chore deficits, the lack of mentors, Me Too, being asked out, catcalling, mansplaining, and manspreading, to name a few. Notice how he's ignoring one of women's biggest complaints, if not their biggest complaint, which is the prevalence of sexual assault and rape culture. Women complain about their safety quite frequently, and all the evidence we have indicates this is a huge issue, but he just ignores the existing sins just as much as he wants to ignore the non-existent ones. There really isn't any argument about male behavior that I think you'd consider valid. Like, I can't really think of a time in the book he's criticized men for doing shitty things. He's like recognized it exists, but he hasn't been like, men need to do better. It's something to keep an eye on. I think it's also worth noting that an honest discussion about why women are less attracted to men would need to reconcile the fact that most men have not been great to women at some point in their lives, but that would run contrary to his narrative, so why would we discuss that? It's also difficult to discuss all of these in a meaningful way, and he only dedicated a single sentence to this, but I'll try for a couple, because I think it's important just giving anyone listening to this who's like, oh yeah, some of those seem a little ridiculous, a brief idea of why these are real issues. I think it's also fascinating because most conservative commentators will admit these are things. They won't call them non-existent. They'll just try to like minimize how important they are.
Yeah.
Right? Very few people, when arguing, are like, the problem doesn't exist. Because as soon as you can point to one example of that, you've proven them wrong. He's not even as intellectually interesting as some of the silliest National Review writers I've read. If you read the Heritage Foundation or watch PragerU, they'll give you weak but seemingly reasonable defenses of the things that like he's talking about. And the reason you do that is so you can say, well, some people think this, and they give a really weak version of that argument, and then they break it down. He's not even doing that here. So as soon as someone like approaches men who have like listened to this and are like, hey, actually, I have stats, they might be more amenable. I don't think this is even effective for him trying to convince people, but whatever. I think a good book would have given him talking points would give like average men talking points to be a seemingly smart misogynist, but unfortunately you have to pay $799 for that. Let's talk about the wage gap, Naomi. Does the wage gap exist?
Yes.
Oh, okay, let's move on.
Okay.
Pew Research in March of 2023 says the gender wage gap has remained relatively stable over the last 20 years. Women earn an average of 82% of what men earned, according to an analysis of median hourly earnings of both full and part-time people. It exists. Great. The article goes into a bit of detail about how the U.S. public perceives this as an issue, knowing that 80% of the public believes the wage gap exists and is at least partially due to employers treating women differently. Huh. Weird.
But it doesn't exist.
There are a number of critiques of the wage gap, with many smart right-wingers noting that women tend to work less than men, self-select into jobs and industries that pay less on average, without explaining why roles like nurses earn so little, and take fewer overtime assignments, likely needing due to the fact they need to cover childcare at home. But the Department of Labor has some thoughts on that. So the Department of Labor studies this issue too, and in 2023, March 14th, 2023, put out an article titled 5 Fast Facts About the Gender Wage Gap. Stats. Overall, women are not paid as much as men, even when working full-time and year-round. Women working full-time year-round are paid 83.7% of what men are paid. Women's labor is undervalued. Most of the disparity in women's and men's pay cannot be explained by measurable differences between them. The main contributor to the wage gap is that women are more likely than men to work in low-paying jobs that offer fewer benefits. Education isn't enough to eliminate the gap. As we've talked about in a prior episode, women have more years of education, are more likely than men to have completed associate's, bachelor's, and master's degrees, yet there's a significant gender wage gap at every level of education. A woman has to obtain 1 degree higher than a man to make the same amount as that man over the course of a lifetime. Age. The gender wage gap does not resolve itself as women age. The wage gap for older women workers is larger for younger women workers. And finally, occupation. The largest identifiable causes of the gender wage gap are differences in the occupations and industries where women and men are most likely to work. Women are 2 out of every 3 full-time workers in occupations that pay less than $30,000 per year, and fewer than 1 in 3 full-time workers in jobs paying an average of $100,000 or more. However, even in these same occupations, women earn less on average than men. So it doesn't even go away when men select the exact same positions that women do. And of course, I want to note that all of this is even more true for Black and Hispanic women, because why not? In for a penny, in for a pound. Might be something of that wage gap thing. Microaggressions. I think it's interesting because so many conservative individuals claim that a lot of grievances on the left are just made up, but a lot of them just originate from sociological observations about human interactions that some people are like, oh, that's interesting. He's doing the exact same thing when he attempts to define men and women's relationships as contracts and as us needing to choose the right type of contract, right? Like, that's a sociological observation, and he's attempting to, like, put rules and behavior on it. That's kind of what identifying microaggressions is. Whatever. Anyways, microaggression is a term used for commonplace, daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental slights, whether unintentional or intentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. Things like asking non-white people where they're from, assuming that they must not be from your country, or asking Asian people to help you with your math homework. No one's saying it's as bad as, like, very tangible things like lynching or redlining or other horrific things that have happened in like the past, but it's a way of articulating many people's grievances with environments that claim to be welcoming, but use language of exclusion or stereotypes. It's a real thing, and it's funny that a book about how down on their luck men are wouldn't recognize the utility of language that helps convey feelings of exclusion or bias, right? A smart author would be like, you know, men are discriminated against in our society, and I don't like it when women assume we have to be the providers. Nope, not even going to engage with that. Harassment. Rollo says in chapter 1 that 1,000 men are yelling shit at women every month. I think harassment exists. Patriarchy. I understand that the man who wrote a book pretending that women have never been coerced into sex or relationship might have difficulty understanding that sometimes our culture indicates a bias towards men. In the same way, like, the rest kind of fall into the same camp. He's either ignoring or downplaying certain real phenomenon while pretending women do nothing but complain about these issues. I think, unfortunately, most women just accept they need to live with things like manspreading because they recognize the very real dangers they can experience by politely asking a man to be more considerate. So then he goes on, the false oppression damages men. It's not only nationwide negging, but women are increasingly painting normal, though perhaps awkward or regrettable male behavior as a sin, or worse, a crime punishable by the courts. This doesn't mean all men are innocent, but it seems women in society are trying to make being normal men bad, toxic, or even criminal, which does nothing to improve male-female relationships. Sometimes women just want blood. Sometimes they want vengeance. Occasionally, some women just plain hate men. And this is where it snuffs out any of the benefits the new contract could potentially offer. In debate terms, we would call this the place you'd put your evidence or your warrant. Stats on the number of men put away every year because they mean women, something like that. It really feels like someone who spent too much time on the internet, not just from the OnlyFans perspective, but like someone who watches World Star and like videos of people fighting on Twitter. Like, this doesn't seem to have any basis in like normal reality outside of like curated compilations on YouTube. As in the last point, he's really covering up how many men are innocent here. It's hard to get accurate numbers, but small-scale studies of male university students find out that almost 11 to 30% admit to sexual assault or rape on surveys. More when the word rape isn't used, but the action described clearly is. That's not to say that women are 100% pure and innocent, but he's saying that a fraction of men might actually be bad, and all the stats are like, oh, it's a big fraction though, dude. 3 out of 10's a big number. Maybe we should dig into that. Interesting. He says that the false rape accusations on college campuses of the 2010s did nothing to foster loving relations between men and women. And I agree with that, because I don't think that was their intention. I don't think people make rape accusations because they want to improve relationships. I think they do it because they want someone to be held accountable for their behavior. Crazy. Hashtags like kill all men or men are scum may be relegated to small segments of the internet, but they have a devastating effect on men's morale. Getting men fired from their jobs because they asked you out at work is a near-death sentence as it threatens a man's livelihood. But keep in mind, this is a dude who thinks that we should have a society without welfare. So you'd think if men are getting fired constantly from their jobs, it would be beneficial to have a system where they didn't have to die out in the state of nature.
No, because he wants this hyper-capitalistic society.
Yeah. No, that's all fair. So he continues. In construing unwanted male attention as sexual assault or harassment, punishable by jail time, makes men plain afraid of women. Tragically, it puts every man in a Black Widow catch-22, where his genetics compel him more than any force in the universe to chase women, but at the potential expense of his reputation, life, or livelihood. Naomi, do you know what a Black Widow is?
Yes. I get them all the time in my backyard.
Well, you know what, like, the metaphor of Black Widow is? Okay.
It's like you catch it in a web and then it won't let you go and it's evil.
Well, I think he's specifically referencing Black Widows eating male spiders that mate with them.
Yeah.
Do you know what a catch-22 is?
No.
Okay. He's using both of these incorrectly. It's great. So this isn't a catch-22. This is dramatic irony. He's using the phrase wrong and trying to seem like he's smart. A catch-22 is a paradoxical situation from which an individual cannot escape because of contradictory rules or limitations. The term was coined by Joseph Heller, who used it in his 1961 novel Catch-22. Great book, by the way. You should, totally check it out.
Okay.
Catch-22s often result from rules, regulations, or procedures that an individual is subject to but has no control over, because to fight the rule is to accept it. So another example is a situation in which someone is in need of something that can only be had by not being in need of it. So, for instance, the only way to qualify for a loan in some instances is to prove to a bank you don't need a loan, right?
Yeah.
You have to have really good credit in order to get
A
good
loan.
loans,
Yeah.
but you can't get good credit without having enough money to not always need the loans.
Yes.
Right. So a catch-22 is like this weird paradox that pops up a lot in like government procedures and like interactions with businesses. Again, by the way, the book is great. It talks about the craziness of war. It's a cool introduction to logic. I would highly recommend it. So he's talking about catch-22s putting men in these positions. But again, it's just dramatic irony. An actual catch-22 would be like, most men are super horny and compelled to have sex with women due to their genetics. But women won't have sex with any man who acts super horny due to his genetics because they consider it distasteful, right? That would be a catch-22. The only way to actually attract a woman would be a calm, rational, non-horny person, but a non-horny person wouldn't want to have sex with a woman in the first place. That's completely different. Now, unfortunately, the reason he's saying this is casually setting up a defense for rape. Basically saying men are compelled more than anything else to pursue women. We thus shouldn't be surprised if they take it too far when a woman doesn't return their affections. So there's that, but also the fact that he's attempting to be the smartest person in the room and actually is just showing how much of an idiot he is.
This is the entire book. I don't know why we're surprised, Joel.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting, too, because he follows this and says the clickbait nature of social media, as well as the dinosaur mainstream media, always promotes train wrecks over happy stories, which is fascinating because he's promoting train wrecks over happy stories and treating them as, like, sole examples of how society is going down the tubes. However, he continues, the anecdotal evidence is corroborated by statistical evidence. Modern relations between men and women are more like a war of the sexes than it is a loving, happy, sex-filled new contract utopia. With all of its promises and potential, the new contract has not only failed, but has made things drastically worse. It's like adding 1 + 1 and equaling 47,932.
Every time someone says a big number, I'm just reminded of Marjorie Taylor Greene trying to say, like, the big number. She's like, 15,500, 15,000, over 15 million people.
The actual results of the new contract are so far removed from the intended outcomes, so it's not like we're adding 1 + 1 and getting 3. It's like adding 1 + 1 and getting 47,932. Confusing us further, it's not like men didn't bend over backwards for women. We gave women absolutely everything they wanted. We gave them rights.
False.
Independence.
Also false.
A welfare state.
Okay.
Birth control. Reproductive rights.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, you can tell this book was written in like 2021, not early 2023. Affirmative action, heavily subsidized college educations, nursing stations, maternal leave, fraternal leave.
Why do we need nursing stations?
Well, it's like pumping in the airport.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was thinking like you're a nurse and you get a station at a hospital.
I caught fraternal leave, which is inaccurate. He means paternal leave. For, you know,
when you're in a fraternity and it gets too much, you drink too much, it's like, oh, guys, I need some PTO time.
Well, it could mean that. Fraternal literally means, like, related by being a brother.
Yeah.
So I think he's saying that we gave women the ability to have their brothers get time off to help them raise kids.
Yeah.
Sensitive soy boys like Hassan Abi, quotas, lower standards for employment, anti-catcalling laws. He misspells this here and goes anti-cat calling laws, not anti-cat-calling laws.
Anti-cat calling.
Yeah, so he's saying laws against calling your cat, not laws against cat calling.
But I like calling my cat.
WIC, entire artificial industries to employ them, such as education, HR, DEI, nonprofits, social work.
Oh my God, keep going.
Complete college programs to study themselves, women's studies, etc. Well, that's one example. Student loan bailouts and open relationships.
What?
We even indulge their delusional fantasy that being fat is beautiful.
Oh my God.
Worse, despite giving women everything, we continued showering them with gifts, flowers, romance, McMansions, wedding rings, expensive weddings, date nights, and chore play.
What the fuck is chore play?
We'll get to that. There is not one stone left unturned, not one idea unconsidered, not one need unintended, and we're still miles off. Have you considered, like, not being a piece of shit? We are only left to conclude we missed something. Something big, something huge, something so glaring and obvious it might have been staring us right in the face this entire time. And we most certainly did. So, he says gave.
Yes.
Men gave women this. I think that's a generous term because it's like saying slaveholders gave slaves their freedom.
Oh. That's what the Black Republican presidential candidate said.
Oh, okay.
What was his name? John something?
John Cena.
John Cena. I can't see him.
Yeah, what came before the freedom was given? Was there any pushback, any outside forces? Might there be still some resentment that might exist after the fact?
There absolutely was no pushback, and there actually is no resentment that still is held from women.
Yeah. It's also really weird, and I can't unpack all of this in any meaningful way, but it's strange that he thinks that all of this was, like, created by men and given to women to appease them, compared to, like, women saying, hey, we're members of society who go out in public, could we have these things? And then maybe being, like, designers and, like, people who design buildings and, like, run buildings who are like, oh, yeah, we should have a separate area for women to nurse in. Yeah, I don't know why he's saying that men believe giving women nursing stations in public spaces makes them more likely to put out. Like, I don't know why he thinks that was the logic there, rather than like, oh, there's this thing that sometimes happen where women are nursing in public and they like privacy and we're going to respect that. Weird. Open marriage, Naomi. Isn't it strange that men gave women open marriage and now women don't want to date them? Any thoughts on who actually wants open marriages?
Tell me.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was setting you up for that.
Yeah.
YouGov has done polling on open relationships.
Okay.
In 2021, April of 2021, they published a report.
What do they define as open marriages, just out of curiosity?
That is an interesting question. I believe it is basically the normal definition where it's like you are married to someone, but you can have sex with other people.
Okay.
I get that there's like ambiguity there. Some people are like, you can go on dates with other people. You can have oral sex, but like non-penetrative, whatever.
It can also be like you guys are bringing thirds or fourths or how many, or you guys are going to sex parties or
Well, he doesn't define it, so I don't have to.
Okay, go ahead.
A YouGov poll of more than 23,000 Americans finds that about a quarter of Americans say they would be interested in having an open relationship. Weirdly enough, men, 32%, are more likely than women, 19%, to say that they'd be interested in a non-monogamous relationship. Among married couples, this was also the case. 30% of husbands would be interested, while fewer wives, 21%, feel similarly. There is some evidence that the number of women interested in open relationships is increasing, and I do find it fascinating that women who are in marriages are more likely to like want to have an open relationship, and men are slightly less likely.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that like women were the ones pushing for it in the first place. I think this also solidly betrays like how right-wing he is. This whole section betrays how right-wing he is. It's been hinted at, it's been stated in different points, but this is like the best condensation of it. And how this book is serving as a manifesto to bring incel men into the conservative fold. He's basically saying, help us disable all these things women like or rely upon, and they'll have to date you. Like, the reason women won't date you is because they have all these great perks, but if we were to get rid of them, boy, that would be good.
Men would only date each other. That's what what's his face said.
That was Steve Harvey.
Yeah, that's what
Steve Harvey's like,
said.
if only men existed, they go on vacation to Vegas and they'd go to strip clubs all the time. But wait, women don't exist, so I guess they're watching each other on stripper poles.
Yummy.
Thank you, Steve Harvey. You know, we're going to have to discuss that other Steve Harvey book at some point.
Absolutely not. Not after this. Give me a year and then we can talk about it.
Oh, you don't want to hear about... Okay, I won't spoil anything.
Okay.
It's pretty good. I think this is a good place to wrap up because, you know, we're about to start chapter 5. Yeah, when we talked about this initially, I was like, is he trying to, like, bring people into the conservative fold, or is he just, like, complaining about how much women suck and, like, how they won't date him? And I think it's very much a combination of the two, but I think given, like, the fact that we've seen so much outcry against, like, basic things that women ask for, like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had a diversity program so old man Jenkins wasn't, like, hitting on me constantly at work? Yeah, he very much is in favor of, you know, like a fascist takeover of the U.S. government and The Handmaid's Tale.
Well, he's definitely, we can see more and more of that conservativeness coming out.
Yeah. I do have to wonder, this is someone who's, like, very infatuated with young women.
Yeah.
Like, he seems to believe women lose their, like, attractiveness after age 30. And so I have to wonder,
25 with him.
If he instituted, like, a Handmaid's Tale in the United States, would they have, like, the robes, or would all women have to, like, walk around in bikinis?
I'm going to say everyone at the age of 25 and after each child has to get a breast breast enhancement. And after the age of 30, you have to get a full, like, mommy makeover because obviously you are going to be pumping out children like crazy.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. It's really nice that men gave women plastic surgery so that they could, you know, participate in staying attractive even when they reach the ripe old age of 31.
Yeah. We're just so lucky to have you guys. What would we do without you guys?
I think you'd be happy you're not discussing books like this on the podcast.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. You should treat yourself for listening to this. Go to the freezer, get yourself an ice cream sandwich.
No. Better yet. Go to a farmer's market.
Ooh.
Yeah. Go get yourself some fresh produce and have a good old poop after you eat those produce.
Spend $8 on a coffee. Make sure it's a good coffee.
A lemonade that's made out of Minute Maid lemonade, and they add pulp too. What is that but Chick-fil-A?
Low standards, but unfortunately accurate about Arizona farmers markets. Well, this isn't a podcast about Arizona farmers markets. This is a podcast on why women won't date men. And we're answering that question 1 week at a time.
Every week. Yep. We love you so much. Wear a condom.
We have many thanks for the use of our theme music, which is the song Drop by Ketsa. You can find more of their music online at ketsa.uk. You can also find Date These Guys online on Twitter and Instagram at @DateTheseGuys or visit datetheseguys.org. If you have questions for the podcast or want to be a wealthy sugar parent, please send an email to datetheseguys@gmail.com. If you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/datetheseguys. We have behind-the-scenes information, early episode access, participation in polls, and exclusive access to a guy sibling map of date ideas for the Arizona area. Since the world sucks right now, we are currently donating all Patreon proceeds to trans organizations like the Trevor Project, a trans suicide prevention organization, and moving assistance funds for those fleeing states outlawing their very existence. Please consider becoming a member and supporting our work today.